Tales from the Coast program. This is a sold-out performance tonight, and our first one was as well. So thank you so much for joining us tonight and being a part of this. My name is Gary Litton. I'm the Executive Director for the Friends of Rookery Bay, which is the nonprofit organization that supports the important work here, supporting research, education, and stewardship within the 110,000 acres of the Rookery Bay Research Reserve. I've actually been associated with Rookery Bay for a little over 30 years. And I was here in 1987 when the Friends got started. I was only 5 years old at the time. But the Friends does great work. And I'm curious, how many of you are members of the Friends of Rookery Bay? Okay, good. We've got maybe half of you are. For those that are not, I would encourage you to consider joining us. It's a fantastic organization, dedicated, passionate individuals that care very much about our quality of life here in Southwest Florida, and Rookery Bay is a big part of that. I'll give you one quick example. Last year, members, 500 strong by the way, members of our Friends of Rookery Bay contributed over 11,000 hours of support to the Rookery Bay Research Reserve. So it's a significant opportunity to give back. So please, if you're interested, go to our website or talk to one of our staff who are here tonight, and they can fill you in on how you can get more involved. Another way that you can get involved is a powerful opportunity that's coming up very shortly. We've been selected as one of 40 nonprofits here in Collier County by the Richard Schultz Family Foundation to participate in a match program. They have put $500,000 on the table against matching dollars that come in during an online giving campaign that starts on February 15th and runs through February 16th. Every dollar that we're able to raise for Rookery Bay through this campaign goes directly to our environmental education programs, and we reach thousands of 4th grade, 7th grade, and high school, college, and university students each year. So if you like what you see here at Rookery Bay, if you care about our mission, please consider joining us in the matching campaign. What's really cool about this is we have been given a challenge match so that every dollar that you might contribute in this program is triple matched up to the first $2,500, and then we get additional matching funds beyond that. So again, if you'd like to learn more, go to our website. There's a direct link that will help you understand. But those dollars are hugely powerful in helping support the work that we do here. So I'd appreciate your consideration for that. So on to our program tonight. Our Tales from the Coast is part of our celebration of our 30th year. This is underwritten by the Delora and Lester Norris Foundation, and we're very glad for their support. The Tales from the Coast is really all about storytelling. Clyde Butcher gave a great program a month ago. But tonight, I'm really particularly pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Ellen Prager to you. Ellen and I think I've known you 20 years.
I was only 5 years old.
She was 5. That's not how I remember it. But Ellen is a very unique individual. She comes from a very strong academic background. She got her master's at Rosenstiel at University of Miami, went on to get her PhD at Louisiana State University. Very strong in the sciences, and then discovered that the science community doesn't do a very good job communicating with people and helping them understand the value of science and what they do. So she sort of shifted her focus of her career and became a communicator of science. And she does this through books, through films, through television. She's been on CNN, and you may have seen her on television over the last several years. She's a fantastic communicator and a wonderful storyteller. So please join me in welcoming Ellen Prager.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you so much for coming out this evening. It's always a joy to be here. I support Rookery Bay and both in their education and conservation and research mission as much as I can. So it's always a pleasure for me to come and to be invited just to tell stories what else could I want? So I really appreciate this opportunity. And I'm going to do it a little bit differently. Those of you who've seen me speak before, I typically will speak for a while and take questions. But this time, because I'm going to talk about some different stories as I go, I wanted to leave it open to questions as I go along. So if you have a question, don't be shy. Raise your hand, and we'll get you going. If it looks like it's running on and I want to keep going, I'll hold off. But please, this time, don't be shy. Ask questions throughout the talk, because I'm going to have different topics as I go. And also just want to tell you all, we're also very excited tonight, because we actually have a national audience. We are on Facebook Live. It's very exciting. Don't be nervous. So very early on in my career, I was very fortunate. I'd say throughout my career, I've been incredibly fortunate to have what some people might say are adventures in marine science, which have been done either in school or through jobs, but it's been great. Early in my career, I spent a lot of time in the Caribbean. I went to school between my junior and senior year in college at Wesleyan University at a place called West Indies Marine Lab, and I studied science. You can see some pictures from the Caribbean here. That was one job where we only had a small boat, but we had a lot of equipment. I had to hang on. While I was doing my PhD, I went to Fiji to look at the impact on reefs.
I have a quick question. Is there any way we can reduce the lighting in here so we can enjoy
Maybe just a little bit.
Try
I might go a little bit less. Can we bring it up just a little bit? We need a balance. Is that any better? Go back.
There you go.
Okay. I'm a walker, so you guys might get out of the zone. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. So I spent a lot of time in when I was doing my master's degree, I had a great opportunity to go down in this tiny little submersible to study on the extended east coast of Florida on the shelf. So even early on, I was very fortunate to have these great experiences. But as my career progressed, sometimes I'm not sure how I got involved with the projects I have, but they've all been fascinating. And what I like about it is I'm always learning, not only about my own science, but my colleagues' science. One of the things about science that I like to talk about is obstacles you face, surprises that happen. It's not just about writing a proposal and collecting data. There's a lot that goes on in the field that you learn from everything you do. So I thought I would share with you tonight, just from some of the experiences. Some are things I'm doing now, some are things I've done in the past, and some things that have happened along the way and that I've learned from. Right after I got my PhD, I went to work for an organization called the Sea Education Association. It's based in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and they take undergraduates from around the country out to sea on these tall sailing ships for 6 weeks. So you spend 6 weeks on shore teaching oceanography, and then you go out to sea for 6 weeks. How's that sound? Pretty good?
No.
That did not sound like and when they're out at sea, they're learning oceanography, nautical science, maritime history. They're learning how to sail. It was a fantastic program. Now I decided while I was doing this, I would also try and continue to do some research. So I was doing some work on what we call sediment dynamics at a lab at MIT, but I had to collect sand while I was out on the ships. And there's one kind of sand that's one of my favorites. I'm kind of obsessed with it. They're called ooids, and that's what this picture over here is. They're small, white, they look like white, shiny beads. They only form in the Bahamas and the Persian Gulf today. And when you jump into sand made of ooids, you sort of sink down to your knees, and it's like, oh my God, this is incredible. Well, in the dynamics work that I was doing, I had to collect some ooids for my experiments, of course. And the students just thought I was crazy, because I brought all these containers, plastic bags, and I made them go out on the Zodiac off of Cat Key in the Bahamas in the Zodiac to jump in the water to collect ooids. And I was so excited to see them. And they just thought I was crazy. They're like, it's just sand, Ellen. It's sand. So we anchored the ship, and We went over near Cat Cave, we took a little Zodiac, we went out to the place where I knew there was a sandbar made of fluids, jumped in the water. At first it was just me, and I had them pass me a bucket and, some plastic bags, and then I was like, you guys want to come out and help? And they're like, okay. They jump in, they start picking up handfuls of fluids, and they're like, do you have any extra bags? Can we take some of these home? This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So I convinced them to love fluids. They're really interesting. But again, it was just one of these experiences that, from the outside sounds kind of, oh, it's just science. But when you get out there and you see it for yourself, it was really amazing. So after I left about SEA, no, it wasn't all smooth sailing, that other picture. My very first trip on SEA, we were sailing in the North Atlantic and we hit a hurricane. And there was no way around it, and we had to decide whether we should cross the path or turn tail and go the other way. And that's what I said to the captain, I'm just the chief scientist, you decide. And we ended up crossing the path so that we could get out of the bad side of the hurricane. We didn't want to be on the right-hand side. And we crossed something like 30 miles away from the eye. And we had a little bit of damage, we didn't have any injuries, but it was my very first trip. And I was like, nobody said this in my contract. There was nothing about hurricanes. Another trip on SEA, here's a water spout, and I was in the aft cabin, the chief scientist and the captain are in the aft cabin, and you get very used to it. Anybody here a sailor or a boater? You get very used to the way your ship should be sailing. And the captain and I were in the aft cabin doing something, and all of a sudden, the ship heeled over and started turning. We're like, that's not right. We ran up to the deck, and a water spout was threatening to go right across our bow. And so the students and the mate on watch did an emergency dive, which would have been perfectly fine. It was great, but as they were doing it, one of the students got his ankle caught in one of the lines on the feet. Believe me, you never want to see that. And we got it out in time before it was really bad, but sailing for long distances out in the open ocean sounds very glamorous, but it is hard and it's dangerous. And that said, was one of the best experiences of my life. And teaching students out there was fantastic. And I'll tell you, one of the things outside of ocean science that I thought was really good about SEA, the idea of limited resources. What do you do with your waste? Living in a very packed area. What a great lesson for these students. It was really fun. Not that part so much.
But you got a good photo.
But I got a good photo. Well, that water spout was not the water spout that crossed our path. But we literally were, I could see the water coming off of the ocean from the water spout. That's how close we were. It was amazing. Another point in my career, I was doing research for the U.S. Geological Survey. And the research I was doing was in Florida Bay, which is this wedge-shaped area between, this is the southern extent of the Everglades, and of course here are the Florida Keys. This area is known as Florida Bay. And we were doing some sediment and wave dynamics, and we were mapping the bottom habitat. Now, what you notice about Florida Bay is that it's not one big, wide, open bay. In fact, it's connected by a network of mangrove islands and mudbanks. So you see those little dark spots? Those are the mangrove islands, but all those sort of light lines, those are actually mudbanks. And when I say mudbanks, I mean mudbanks. This is what they look like, this picture is what they look like at sort of low tide. And some of them have seagrass on them, some of them don't, some of them have shell material. And so what we were doing all throughout Florida Bay is we were taking sediment samples, we were checking to see what the bottom type was, we were measuring how deep the sediments were, and there were some places that were really hard to get around. And the top of the mud banks were particularly hard. And so you see there's this seagrass and it's shelly, muddy, and you sink, and literally you could sink up to your thighs in places. It was nasty. And so we would try all different things to figure out how to walk on these mud banks. Nothing worked. It was horrible. At one point we ended up crawling. One point the scientist I worked with, I swear to you, he took one of those kickboards that you use in a pool and he duct taped to his belly. I will not say names. But then we discovered that the park rangers, the Everglades National Park Rangers, had an ingenious idea. They were using plastic snowshoes. And if you look very carefully in this image, you can see those are plastic snowshoes. And I said, fantastic, I'm going to do it. So I got a pair of these snowshoes, put them on. But what I didn't realize at the time was as you cross the mud bank, they work really well on the seagrass. You don't damage the seagrass, you don't sink into the mud. But in the midst of the seagrass are these giant open mud holes. So here I am, these snowshoes are fantastic. Going across right into one of those holes. What happens? The mud sucks up through the holes in the snowshoes, and I did the most perfect face plant you've ever seen. Right in the mud. And the scientist I was working with, he can't really say much because he was like a kickboard guy, but he had a good laugh. And we were like, I never mentioned this about the mud holes. And you can just see me there after my face plant just getting out of the mud. But we decided snowshoes were great with the seagrass, but you had to be really careful for those mud holes. And what we came up with, this was after a summer's worth of work, was a bottom map of the habitat, the bottom habitat all throughout Florida Bay. And if you see all these red dots, those are all the places we sampled. We used satellite imagery and other maps that were available, and we confirmed everything by those samples. It was a very long summer. Let's see, what other obstacles we had? Oh, of course, sunburn. We were on a small boat going in and out all the time, sunburn, especially our lips. Our lips got really sunburned. The only thing I could find was like this bright pink zinc oxide that would be strong enough. The guy was like, no way, I am not putting that stuff on my lips. So he literally used duct tape to protect his lips. Which was probably okay until he went to take it off.
Right.
Another time we were taking a sediment core, and in Florida Bay at times, if it's windy at all, the water's milky white. You cannot see through it at all. So sometimes we have to do everything by feel. So we were in a boat, and I was on snorkel gear, and I was going down to take a short core of sediment. And I get in, down there, taking the core, I come up and I hand it to my comrade in the boat. His eyes are really big. I'm like, is there a problem? He's like, oh, no, just go get the replicant. We have to get two. He goes, just go get it. I'm like, are you sure? Okay. So I go down, I come back up, I get in the boat. I'm like, what? Well, there were a couple sharks circling behind the boat, which, they look fine. So thanks. So nothing ever happened. Sometimes we would be in the mud, like working on experiments or whatever, and you'd be stuck here, and just a little while away, you'd see like a thing go by. There's no running away, but the sharks down there, most of them are small, like bonnet-head sharks, and blacktips are pretty skittish. I mean, so it's one of those things where rationally you knew they weren't a problem, but emotionally when you see that fin and you're stuck in the mud, you're like, hey. So this was a really trying experience, but I also look back on it as one of my favorite research projects because I learned so much. But one of the other really unexpected things that happened is, so if I go back, actually, maybe on here is better. So one of the unexpected things that happened is when we jumped out on some of these mud banks, see this would be a mud bank here. This would be one time we jumped out on a mud bank and the water was boiling hot. It was only a couple inches deep. It was boiling. I mean, literally, we had to jump back in the boat. We'd never seen it that way. And then we were snorkeling in a nearby basin. So this is the mud bank surrounding a basin of water, probably about 10, maybe 12 feet deep at the most. And we dove down to the bottom, and there was a layer of warm water on the bottom. Now think about that. Warm water is less dense than cooler water. So how could the warm water be on the bottom? Now it was we could not figure it out. And what we finally realized was happening, we went out on another trip and we brought an instrument that measures salinity. Because the only thing that could explain that was the higher salinity water, so it's put more salt in it, so it's denser. So what was happening is the water up on the mud banks was getting so heated, it was evaporating, and the salt was concentrating on the top of the mud banks, making the water heavy, and it was cascading off the mud banks and settling in those bays. We had no idea what was going on, because when we first dove down there, we were like, how can the water be warm? So that was a really interesting result, which we were never looking for. Very interesting. So now the Galapagos. Anybody here ever been to the Galapagos? A couple people? I love the Galapagos. First time I was there was in the 1980s with Dr. Peter Lynn and one of his graduate students, Josh Feingold. And we went to study the impact of El Nino on corals. And one of the things about going out in the field is you're always trying to anticipate what the problems are going to be. Typically weather, technical problems, your boat's going to break down. But in the Galapagos, we had a very unusual problem. Anybody know what animal that is? It's a sea lion. And this is my buddy holding a camera. These sea lions loved our gear. You would put the gear on the bottom, and they would steal it. One time, I was lying on the bottom, I saw my buddy over here, and something started pulling my fins. I'm like, whoop, sea lion. And one of their favorite games is this. They do this to you all the time. They swim right up to your face, and then they blow balls. And it's kind of a tease, like, you're not very good at this, are you? So that was in the 1980s. In a turn of fate, when I was working as the assistant dean at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School, they had a project with Royal Caribbean, and Celebrity Cruise Line decided to purchase a small expedition ship in the Galapagos. And they knew I'd been there, so they asked me to come along as a consultant to see what they needed to do. And so ever since, for over 10 years, I've been going back to the Galapagos 2 to 3 times a year as a consultant for Celebrity Cruise Line. It's horrible. So just to remind you, the Galapagos are about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. They straddle the equator. Here they are. It's an archipelago of islands. Depending on what your definition of an island is, there are about 16, 15 major islands. 3 or maybe 4 of them have human habitation on them. A lot of them are absolutely uninhabited. And I won't say pristine because there are things like invasive species and other issues. But really wonderful. And here is the ship, Celebrity Expedition, that I've been working on. And in fact, they just bought 2 smaller ships to go and stay in the Galapagos as well. But one of the times I was out there, we decided it would be interesting to compare the expedition versus the Beagle, the ship that Darwin went on. So here's a comparison between the Celebrity Expedition and the Beagle. So I like, the length, there's a little difference between the Beagle and the expedition. The speed, of course, expedition, we can go 60 knots, HMS Beagle, variable, depending on the wind. Crew, look at that, the crew is pretty much the same, which is sort of interesting. Yes, 100, we have maximum 100, which is the maximum you can have in the Galapagos. They had only a few. And of course, our favorite food is wonderful on expedition, hardtack and cockroaches. So we have fun talking about what the conditions were like when Darwin went versus what it's like now when we go. So I wanted to show you this. The Galapagos, the origin of the Galapagos is at a hot spot. So the islands are built from volcanoes. And I, for so long, have wanted to see an eruption in the Galapagos. And every time I go, I always say to the naturalist I work with, just a little one. I want a big one. I'm not being out, just a little one. In May of 2005, I was sent this video. I was not on the ship when Wolf Volcano on Isabella Island erupted. And what was amazing was, it was an eruption that nobody expected. Everybody thought it would be on Sierra Negro or Fernandina Island, not Wolf Volcano. And Expedition was the first ship on site. And last time I was there, I was talking to some of the naturalists on board, and they said at first, somebody said, hey, somebody's shooting off a flare in the sky, it's all red. And like the captain and so the cruise director came out and they said, yeah, that's no flare. And so they went to find, it was at night, and they arrived on site at about 1 in the morning. And they got everybody up on the ship to see this. Damn it, I wasn't there. Yeah, they like to tease me for that. I'm still hoping. I still have a chance. Because the islands are volcanic in origin and they sit on a hotspot, the islands that are over hotspot right now look like they have just erupted yesterday. And this is a place, this is on, let's see, this is probably on Fernandina, and this lava flow is probably less than 1,000 years old. And so you can go hiking. This is a lava cactus, which is one of the what we call pioneer plants. It's one of the first kind of vegetation that can start growing on the lava. And the lava here is very similar to what you see in Hawaii. Here's another one of my favorite shellnuts. This is a place where we go hiking. We've got what's called a hoi hoi lava flow going through some scoria cones. Those are called scoria cones. And you can hike along that hoi hoi flow. Really amazing. A few more pictures. Here's a group hiking on another flow. And these are called spatter cones right there. That's on another island. And they kind of look like, anybody ever made drip castles of sand? These are kind of like lava dripstones, but they're called spatter cones. And this is one of my favorite things. This is like kind of like the volcanic equivalent of fluids for me. They're called granito. These are called granitos. They're also known as lava ovens. This one is about knee high. It's pretty big. The way they form is if you have a lava tube or a lava tunnel and there's a crack in the roof, as lava's flowing by, it spurts out. And as it spurts out, the lava's still kind of liquidy. It falls down and hardens very quickly, and you get a central vent, and you get a little ring of hard lava growing around it. Really cool. Granito. I think there's a tequila for that. Not that I would know. Now, what of course everybody likes in the Galapagos are the animals. And I'm kind of easy to recognize this one, the blue-footed booby. One of the nice things about the Galapagos, one of my favorite things in fact, is that it's very well protected. And there are rules about when you go hiking, where you go, what you can do, and so you have to stay on the trails and you have to go with the naturalists. And they enforce it really well, so much so that the animals will breathe and dance and be right next to the trails because they're not afraid of humans. You have to give them the right of way. And so they will do their mating dances. Look, this is right next to the trail, and there's a little chick. This is also a blue-footed booby chick. They're so fluffy with down that they actually look bigger than the adults sometimes. And one of the questions that I always get asked is, why are their feet blue? And if you think about it, in nature, there are not a lot of animals, right, that have blue. Well, it's not exactly 100% clear why, but we think it has to do with the structure of the feet, not like the composition itself. But one thing is clear, there's been experiments done that if you stop feeding the birds fish, or you just reduce their diet, their feet start to fade. So it definitely has to do with the males showing virility. The brighter the blue, the healthier they are. Another one of my favorite features are the waved albatross. Yes. There's the adult, and there's the chick. And there's some in their mating dance. These are giant birds. When they're up there like that big, they're huge. This one I wanted to show you because has everybody here seen a cormorant?
Yes.
Well, in Galapagos, they have flightless cormorants, and notice the wings. They look like little ragged, really sad wings. Well, what's happened is when these cormorants arrived in the Galapagos, they could fly, but they had very little competition. They had a lot of food, and it was very close to the rocks, and so they didn't need to fly from island to island. And so over time, they literally lost the ability to fly. Their legs are very muscular, and they're very good swimmers, just like the ones here, but they don't need to fly. And so for me personally, this is one of the great visible examples of evolution and adaptation. You can really understand and see it by looking at the cormorant. And I think we have a question.
We have a question from our Facebook audience.
Yes.
It says, are blue-footed birds found anywhere else in the world?
Are blue-footed birds found anywhere else in the world? I believe they are. I don't think these birds are endemic to the Galapagos, but I have to say I'm not sure where else in the world.
New Zealand.
New Zealand, we have an answer for you. Thank you, New Zealand.
Now that's interactive.
Here's just a few more birds. This is the Nazca booby. It used to be called a hooded or a masked booby. It's now called a Nazca booby. This is a male frigate bird with its throat patch inflated to attract the female. A red-billed tropic bird, one of my favorite, beautiful, beautiful birds, fast flyers, and a Galapagos hawk, being very kind for a picture. Again, the birds, a lot of the birds are very unfearful, and so they will perch right near you for a picture. Obviously, I like to get in the water when I'm in the Galapagos. It's not just about on land. And for me, one of the most amazing things about the Galapagos underwater is what I like to call the strange neighbors. And so you'll be snorkeling, and you have sea turtles, surgeonfish, there are a lot of white-tipped sharks there. And the next thing you know, a penguin will swim by. Now that's just not right. I know, because I've been taught that there's warm water animals and cold water animals. But in the Galapagos, they live together. And here's the Galapagos penguins are the second smallest in the world, the most northern penguins. And last summer while I was there, we had a whole bunch of penguins speeding right underneath us. And there you can see a penguin has just caught a fish. So really, they're just amazing. But I will tell you, they're sneaky little suckers. Yes.
So what role does Ecuador have in administration of the Galapagos?
What role does Ecuador have in the administration of the Galapagos? A very good question. They own the Galapagos. Through the ministry, it's now under the Ministry of Tourism. The Galapagos National Park Director is the real authority. And there's a police in the habitat area, but who controls the park and the park rules is the Galapagos Park National Director, but they're under the Ministry of Tourism of Ecuador. And one thing I will say, one of the things I really like is they have the naturalist system. So you can't go on an island without a naturalist, and you have to have no more than 16 people per naturalist. What I like is that part of that naturalist job is also to report anybody on the island who shouldn't be there, who's not with the naturalist, if they're doing something wrong, if they're going off the trails. And it's literally, if they don't report somebody's park, they could lose their job. And so it's really well enforced. And that's one of the reasons why it's so well protected. So I just wanted to say, one of the reasons why you have such a weird mix of animals is that there's a confluence of ocean currents that impinge on the Galapagos. And so you have warm water currents coming from the north, cold water currents coming from the south, and you also have what's called the equatorial undercurrent, or chromo current, that's deep underwater. It actually hits the Galapagos and brings cold nutrient water up to the surface. And that's one of the reasons why the Galapagos are so productive. But it's that mix of currents is why you get such a weird mix of animals.
I have a question.
Yes?
Do you see a change since you go so often for such a long period of time? Do you see a change, like global warming?
So do I see a change in the Galapagos? The biggest change in the Galapagos is in the town areas. When I first started going there, there was maybe a quarter-mile paved road, that was it. There was one hotel. Now, there's numerous hotels. There's a highway across the island. So the towns have expanded immensely. They're trying to control immigration now because of that. Global warming, not so much. There's big impacts when El Niños happen. During El Niños, the water warms in the Galapagos and it kills a lot of the animals because they're adapted to cooler water, and it shuts down that upwelling that brings nutrients to the surface. Climate change, there's a real debate in terms of the Galapagos what the impacts will be. So we're just sort of waiting to see. But the biggest issue has really been in the towns. On the islands, a lot of the islands look pretty much the same, although invasive species have been a problem brought in through humans, and they're trying to control that. That's also a big change. Of course, sea lions, as I've already mentioned, are a big joy in the Galapagos. And you never know what the sea lions are going to do. This was maybe 2 years ago. As I said, you never know what they're going to do. We've never seen a sea lion do this before. I'm on the Zodiac, the big boats with about like 15 other people. And the sea lion comes by. We're in a place where you can't swim, you can't hike, you can only go for a Zodiac ride called Elizabeth Bay. Here comes the sea lion checking us out. It's kind of cute. He comes around. Now the engine is shut down, but the cooling water, seawater, is cycling through still. He comes over. Oh, what's this? He's not drinking it. He's just playing with it. We didn't want to go anywhere because we didn't want to start the boat. Yes, we had to sit for like 15, 20 minutes while he played, and then we could go on. It was pretty cute. One of my other favorite animals in the Galapagos are the marine iguanas. Here, sometimes you might see iguanas swimming from mangrove to mangrove, but in the Galapagos, they actually dive and can stay underwater for 45 minutes to feed on algae. And I will tell you, there's nothing weirder than when you're snorkeling and you see a marine iguana underwater eating algae. It's like, there's a dinosaur underwater. They are really, that's how they swim. You can see how they swim. And the other thing that they do is because they eat algae, they have a little salt problem in their diet. So they sit on the rocks, heating up in the sun, and they sneeze the water out their nose. So while you're walking by, because everybody thinks they're spitting, but they're not, they're sneezing. We always say, watch out for the flying lizard snot. Of course, giant tortoises, everybody knows the giant tortoises. And along with the giant tortoises, there are sea turtles. The Pacific green sea turtle is the most common one there. And here are my two favorite pictures from the Galapagos. We thought this one was fake at first. We thought the naturalists took it and photoshopped it. We were like, that can't be true. It's a blue-footed booby sitting on a marine iguana. It was real, that's a real shot. And then one of the passengers took this shot as we were leaving the island of San Cristobal. That's a little formation called Kicker Rock. But notice the clouds. Wow. And I contacted some meteorologists, friends of mine. They said that there's a very technical name for them. I think they're shark waves. But what happens is the air gets heated over the island and rises, and there's a shearing wind up here going in this direction, so the tops of the rising clouds get sheared off, and that's what it looks like. So I'm going to go through this pretty quick because there are a couple more things I want to talk about. I've been very fortunate to also work with undersea labs. And between my junior year and senior year for a summer job, I worked as a safety diver for this small undersea lab called Hydro Lab. It was so small we used to call it Hydrocam. And my technical name was a support diver, which was really a euphemism for underwater slave. The best job I've ever had. And then I became the chief scientist for what is now the world's only operating undersea research station, which is called Aquarius Reef Base, which is located about 3.5 miles off of Key Largo, on a small patch of sand called Concrete. And here's what it looks like. That's the undersea lab. The base sits at about 65 feet of water. You're living in this section, which is about 50 feet. And this is a buoy that sits overhead that produces your air, the compressor for air, a generator for power, and there's a microwave station for communications. And so basically a team of 6 aquanauts goes and lives inside for a week to 2 weeks at a time to do science. And you have 2 habitat technicians who are experts at sort of the life support systems and supporting you. And you go through a week of training where you learn how to use the gear, and you learn this is a bathymetry around the habitats, the depth, those are lines of depth, so you learn the area. And you bring down in these special pots everything you're going to need for the week. Your food, your computers, your toothbrush. And the guys that I work with there are really good. They can put just about anything in a pot. Of course, you get to meet the neighbors.
Who owns that?
Right now, it's owned and operated by FIU, Florida International University. Here's sort of a schematic, but it looks like you go in here, climb into the wet porch, take off your wetsuit, shower, dry off, and then there's a compartment here, a living compartment, and then 2 tiers of bunks back here. Now, I don't know who did this. There's no stove, so I don't know what those pots are. Here's what it really looks like inside. You swim down here, take your gear off, climb into the wet ports. That's one of my colleagues I saturated with, I was living with in the habitat. And what's really cool is that the air inside is kept at exactly the same pressure as the seawater outside. So you can keep that moon pool open and you can just climb in. Here's what the inside looks like. Here's the bunks in the back. That's me many years ago. And you have a whole system of life support systems and communications, and you have redundancy of everything in case something were to go wrong. A viewport, a little table to work at. You can make some friends at the local community. And that's your kitchen. You don't have a stove, so you don't have a flame, and so you typically use like camping food that you rehydrate. But there's a weird thing that happens. For some reason, your taste buds don't work. And everything tastes really bland. And so one time somebody sent down a lemon meringue pie. The meringue, which is made of what? And air. Because of the high pressure, it was white slime. And the lemon filling, which couldn't really taste lemon, was yellow goo. So it was a white slime, yellow goo pie. Do you have a question?
Yes, we do. This is a really fun one. Tell us about your family. Do they worry about you when you're under the sea?
Oh, does my family worry when I'm under sea? In the beginning, when I did all these adventures, my family was always worried. But I think that right now they're at a point like this, call us when you can. So I think at first they did, but one of the things in all the projects I've always done, I've always been with people that were very well prepared and trained. And they know that I'm very serious about safety, so I think that helps a lot in their sort of attitude towards what I do. But yeah, and I'm sure they're still worried, they just don't tell me anymore. I want to show you another quick movie. This was some of the science. One of the guys I worked with was studying sponge. Because I want to show you this because so many people think that sponge on coral don't do anything. But what this shows is a scientist has taken what's called fluorescent dye and just left it in the water around the sponge. See it's right there? And I don't know why it's stuck going. And so he's putting it there, the water and the dye. The sponge pumps it in through its system and it's taking out the particles, organic particles and oxygen, and then it releases through the bigger holes. They were called the oxygens. See, and so imagine those sponges are doing that every day on a reef. They filter huge quantities of water and are very important on coral reefs, keeping the water clean, but there's also a problem. The water they release is very low in oxygen. And so if you start to get a lot of sponges on a reef, it could be detrimental to corals. So there's a group that's been studying. And one of the cool things they found is that I think there's a big barrel sponge coming up, and they found that over a couple of days, a barrel sponge can pump a big size to make that amount of water. So they're incredibly active organisms. We don't really know that unless you see something like this. To get outside of the habitat, when you're done and you want to come up to the surface, you have to go through 7.5 hours of decompression inside the habitat itself. It's not a big deal, they just shut it. 17.5, it's basically overnight. But they can control the pressure from the surface station on shore. And so basically you go into your bunk for the first hour on and off your oxygen to start flushing gas from your system. Then it's like a normal night. And when you wake up, you're ready to go back to the surface. So, I'm going to wrap up pretty quickly, but I do want to mention a few things. So one of the other paths that my career's taken, which was sort of unexpected, was writing. And I discovered a real love for writing for a popular audience, whether it's kids 4 to 7 years old or adult audiences. And one of my favorite books is my Sex, Drugs, and Sea Slime audience book, which is about the diversity of life in the sea and why it's not only important to the ocean, but also to human society in terms of biomedical research, drugs, and food, and the economy. But one of the funny things that happened is I would do a lot of talks and people would say, well, you've got high school and above books, and you've got young kids books. What about the middle graders? What about the 8 to 12 years old? What about us? And I was like, you're right. I didn't have anything for middle graders. I didn't even think about it. And yet that's a really important time in a kid's life in terms of what they want to do as a career, what are their lifelong interests going to be. They have great impact on their parents. And so I did some homework to find out what kind of books they liked. And I came up with this idea of writing a fiction series because they love fiction, like Harry Potter, there's Percy Jackson. And so I wrote a fiction series for kids that adventure, a lot of sarcastic humor, there's a good villain, and I integrated real science into the story. And those are the first two books. The first book was The Shark Whisperer, the second is The Shark Rider. Of course, real issues. In the first book, the villain is shark finning and blowing up coral reefs. They go to real places and have adventures. I went to the Bahamas, of course, and what are these? Ooids. Ooids are in the story. Let's just say some of the villains' thugs have a very bad day in the Ooids. The second book, there's a mysterious fish kill in the British Virgin Islands. And one of the key animals in this book is, anybody know what this is? A mantis shrimp, or stomatopod. And they have the fastest, most powerful strike in the animal kingdom. And there's one that has to go to a wildlife rehab center that has an anger management problem. Okay, you guys sort of get my sense of humor. They go, again, in this book, they go to the British Virgin Islands, to some of my favorite places in the British Virgin Islands. In the third book, which just came out in May, part of it takes place in Rookery Bay Aquarium, and part takes place in Grand Canyon, where stingrays go missing from Stingray City. And I will tell you, not only do I love writing these books, interacting with the middle graders has been one of the most joyous things of my life. They are so much fun and so appreciative, and just seeing the difference you can make in their lives is such a reward. One of the other things you may not know, I was fortunate enough to be a consultant on the movie Moana. And, you know, it was one of the, I'm so proud to have played just a little role in the creation. I got to go to the Disney Studios and I gave a talk to the animators, all the people working on the movie. I gave a big talk about the oceans and conditions. And I will tell you, there's a couple lines in the movie. I was like, I know, that's me. That's me. One of the other things this year, I'm very fortunate, is that Dawn District Surgeon called me and they said, would you be a spokesperson for us? Because they have a huge campaign, Dawn Saves Wildlife. It turns out I went to 2 animal rescue centers and they showed me the only thing they will use to clean the birds or even clean the dishware for the fish and things I feed is Dawn. Which I was kind of a skeptic. I'm like, well, what about these like organic cleaners? Wouldn't these be better? And it turns out because, I sound like this is going to sound so cliche, but it turns out it's strong enough in one cleaning to get oils and contaminants off, and gentle enough that it doesn't hurt the animals. Because the thing is, you don't want to clean them more than once, because the cleaning itself stresses the animals out. And so you need a cleaner that's strong enough, yet gentle. Okay, I couldn't help myself. And so lastly, when my books come out, I always try and think of some fun launch events. And probably one of the most fun I had was at the Florida Aquarium, where I did an underwater reading. So I laminated a couple pages from the book, and I got in the big tank at the Florida Aquarium, and so the picture's taken through the acrylic viewing window. There's a whole bunch of kids and people out front. And so I read from the book, and then I did a Q&A with the kids. And the sand tiger shark must have really liked the book, because he would just hang out over my head. So at one point, I was reading, and I knew he was sitting up there. I said, kids, is there something there? Shark! There's a shark sitting over your head. And of course, the first question I got was, you can imagine, why isn't the shark eating you? My answer, I taste terrible. Thank you very much, and open for any questions. Any more questions? Yes.
I know that there are some local reefs that you can actually swim out to. Are you familiar with
The question is local reefs from here, and I'm going to defer to Gary because I'm not familiar with any local
You haven't
reefs.
been snorkeling around here.
Not really.
Well, you should.
But that doesn't.
You should come.
I should come.
Yeah, I mean, there's some natural reefs on
artificial, but not real.
We have some small reefs in local waters here, but nothing like larger.
I will also say afterwards, I am going to go back out. If you want to purchase books, I will go back out and sign books. I think there was a question?
Yeah, back to Galapagos.
Sure.
Although you're working with a company that has a ship, is it better to sort of do it by ship or go and stay at a hotel?
Okay, so the question about the Galapagos is, if you want to go to the Galapagos, what's the best way to see it? Is it to go island hop or to go on a ship? So I'm going to say this not just because I work with the cruise line, but I'm going to give you the reason why it's much better to go with a ship, because there are some islands that you can't get to unless you go on a ship. So like those islands that have the western islands that are pretty far away from the inhabited area, in fact, only the larger ships go out there. And so if you go from island to island, you're very limited to where you go. But if you go on the ships, you can actually go all around the islands. And I see some heads going, yes. Yeah. So you can do it by island hopping, but I think that you're limited to where you get to go.
Also, the ships are smaller.
They're very, yeah.
It's a total immersion in the whole.
Yeah, the ships vary in size. I mean, now Celebrity has a ship that's 16 passengers, 34 passengers, or 100 passengers.
We were on a ship that just had 12 cabins, and it was fabulous.
Yeah, they're all different sizes. What I always say to people, it depends on what you're looking for. It's very easy to cater for what you're looking for, because the good thing is, even if you go on a 100-passenger ship, because you can't have any more than 16 passengers per Annapolis, you're still going to be with a small group. So you still have that small group experience. And so one of the things on a bigger ship is you have more options of what you can do versus on a smaller ship. So they're just different experiences depending on what you're looking for.
So the time of year.
I always get the question. Time of year. There are two extremes in the Galapagos. In February and March, it's the very hot season, and so I would say on the hiking on the island can be difficult. It's so hot, but the water's nice and toasty. So if you like that, you're good. In August and September, the water is much colder, but hiking's great because it's cooler, it's a little cloudier, it's a little bit drizzly sometimes, but the water's freezing. And it's windy if you get seasick. You don't want to go then. So honestly, I actually like the in-between times. I go like May, June, July, or October, November, December, or January. Just try and stay away from those extremes is what I would say. Unless you really, because you don't want to go if the water's not warm, then you got to go, February, March. What's
Can you give some examples of the alien species that you talked about?
The invasive species? Oh, sure. So things that have come over on ships either purposely or by mistake are things like goats. And goats are competing with, for instance, the big thing, are competing with the giant tortoises for food. And so they eat a lot of the food that the giant tortoises would, and they change the landscape. There are also feral cats and dogs. And when I was just there, I was out hiking donkeys. There's islands where there are donkeys now, and they eat the bark of the cactus, and then the cactus dries out and topples over. And so there's quite a few. They're trying to control them. And rats. Rats are another issue. So us humans do such good things. But the good thing is they're getting better at controlling them. And again, one of the things with this naturalist system is we'll be on an island, sometimes we've seen a cat, and they get right on the radio and they report them right away. And people really are working together to try and eradicate them. They've gotten rid of some of the rats. On one island, one of my favorite little islands called South Plaza, they actually collected, I don't know, maybe like 4,000 iguanas, took them off the island, put pellets out, killed the rats, and then put the iguanas on that. So they're pretty serious. Other questions? What temperature was the freezing water? So last time I was there, we jumped in, and I want to say 52. The penguins are happy. I had 2 wetsuits on. So I couldn't resist. It was too much fun. Anything else? Any questions?
Any other questions for Ellen?
Well, thank you so much for coming, and I'll
Thank you, Ellen. Before